What is Chinatown? Perhaps we may be quick to think of just Chinese food, Chinese people, Chinese language. Or maybe for some of us, we only notice driving past the symbolic gate as a guiding landmark to some other destination. The facade is a mix of old and new, yet somehow the streets seem to have grown quieter, especially since the pandemic. But its significance has not changed. Undoubtedly, the history of many Chinese people are deeply rooted here. For me, it was a space to bond with my parents and grandparents, to learn the language, to get in touch with them culturally. As I got older, I gradually spent less and less time here. It felt like losing touch with family. So I wanted to come back and remind myself why the word Chinatown still holds such a large place in my heart. One of my earliest memories was taking the bus from Bonnie Doon to 97th Street. Across the bridge, up the hill, past the gate, the hissing stop, the busy streets, and the rhythmic beat as my hands tightly gripped onto my grandparents and we crossed the street to go for dim sum. One of the things I miss most now is being able to sit down with older generations of my family and learn their stories, not just in the context of their roles to me, but who they were as individuals. So I'm back at Dynasty Century Palace with my mom to reminisce and talk about a bit of the history from her eyes.
咁你同爹哋點解會選擇加拿大咧？
我哋選擇加拿大其實係好偶然嘅，咁啊啱啱遇到有個同學就話俾佢聽，佢嚟加拿大 Edmonton， 咁佢話呢度係出遊嘅，同埋咧就係比較方便工程人員咧揾工，咁所以我哋就嚟咗呢度。
咁其實啲麵嚟，唔該，
唔該，俾啲醋我好唔好？唔該。
咁其實你嚟咗咁耐啦，差唔多有50年。咁我自細就同你陪你同爹哋爺爺媽媽嚟 Chinatown 啦。但係 Chinatown 對你哋嚟講有咩深刻嘅印象，或者有咩 significance 啊？
轉變咗好多啦，因為我哋早期76年嚟嘅時候咧。嗰陣時仲未有嗰個 Canada Place 嘅，嗰度咧原本係一啲餐館，中國餐館，好似有銀筷子啊，又好似有一間叫做唔知係咪美麗華嘅嗰陣時，拆咗嗰度，咁就起咗 Canada Place 啊，即係聯邦政府嘅大樓喺度啦，咁啊改變咗好多，同埋咧嗰個唐人街咧由原本喺呢個 Jasper Avenue 同埋97街。嗰度一路沿住 Jasper 好多啲中國鋪頭嘅，但係而家係咪改變晒就搬晒入去咧？到106街，而家好似而家呢度106 Avenue 啊、107 Avenue 啊咁樣。搬咗嚟再北。係啦，北咗咯。
即係我哋住得咁遠，但係依然你會嚟唐人街。咁其實唐人街對你嚟講係有咩 significance 啊？
因為點都係。自己都係喺香港嚟食慣中國嘢，咁所以有陣時都會。以前咧嗰啲呢邊嘅，譬如 Safeway 啊，仲未有 Superstore 嘅咁，咩 City Market 啊嗰啲咁，完全都冇中國嘢賣嘅，咁所以我哋都係要，即係都係比較嚮往食翻啲唐人嘢，咁啊要嚟唐人街咧。咁同埋後嚟爺爺嫲嫲咧，爹哋嘅媽咪爹哋嚟咗加拿大之後咧，咁佢哋又中意嚟飲茶啊、食飯啊，咁變咗我哋就會嚟唐人街多啲咯。
以前呢度富都我哋差唔多，
富都差唔多個星期都嚟。爺爺媽媽日日朝早都會嚟飲茶咧，有陣時佢哋會嚟呢度著局喎。嗰陣時有著局嘅。
咁如果你想我哋保留一個one aspect of 個 culture 或者 heritage， 會係乜嘢咧？
譬如喺語言方面啦，咁但係仲有一啲習慣咧就好難講，因為我哋都生活咗喺度咁多年啦，咁所以個習慣方面都係要適應翻呢度嘅生活噶啦，所以都冇乜嘢特別嘅要求嘅，但係總之就係你哋仍然知道自己本身係即係個 heritage 係乜嘢，咁就已經足夠。
OK。 由疫情開始到而家，Chinatown 都有轉變。I know 你話其實 Chinatown 熱鬧咗好多，多啲 society 嘅，多啲 organisation。但係如果有人問開你 Chinatown，你會帶我去邊度？咁平時你有啲親戚啊嚟探啊，或者啲朋友嚟探你，你會帶佢去邊度 Chinatown？
我都會帶佢嚟食下點心啊，試下呢度嘅晚飯啊，同埋咧睇下呢度嘅牌樓，因為喺107嗰度仲有一個一個機係啦，喺Lucky 97嗰度有個機咯，去到個中國花園就好靚咯，即係又有小橋流水啊，又有個亭啊，又有個即係啲12生肖俾人哋睇咯。
陣間我去睇下。
好
，OK。
Our story is about communities in the context of food, but it takes so much more to form community. And so I started this part of my journey at the Multicultural Center with Emily Chu, local visual artist and illustrator, and then we shared a meal at All Happy Family Restaurant to talk about her connection to storytelling through art and her connection to Chinatown.
When did you move from Calgary to Edmonton?
I moved to Edmonton in 2011.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you've been here for quite some time.
And then like more physically in the space, 2020, 2021. So it's actually been, it's been recent. But yeah, I love working here. There's like always so much to learn about kind of like myself as well as like the community and how that parallels and contrasts. It's really interesting to me.
What is it that kind of helps you discover who you are?
So I got into the work in Chinatown as like a gentler way to do some more identity work in my art. I'm still kind of finding a lot of the language that I need to use in my art to kind of talk about like what it means to be like a Chinese artist. And a lot of the words aren't actually that natural to me because just growing up, I had like a lot of like questions about my identity. I was like often like the only person of color in my class growing up until like, I don't know, I want to say like into junior high.
Oh, wow.
So there's not actually been a lot of like talk about identity or like culture sharing or like knowledge sharing.
Right.
Or even like around elders, there's like a few. And so it's funny, like now that I'm like in my 30s, I'm finally finding the capacity to kind of go back and work on some of that stuff. So I started really doing Chinatown work to do just more of my own art and like discover what it is that I want to say about who I am. And in many cases, it was actually a more gentle way to look at the community and like talk about Chinatown, talk about Chinese culture, rather than actually talking about anything that I'm finding the language, like something that's like harder for me to find the language to, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
I think it's just making that space to connect with other people and to find shared histories, shared interests, shared like upbringings. I think there's so much that I've never really talked about, that it's like kind of nice to kind of do that gently and with community than to kind of put the words on the paper and do it yourself.
That's actually, it's interesting. So what kind of exchanges have really stood out for you when you're engaging with people in the community? You're talking about, you know, your respective upbringings.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities.
Okay.
There's a lot of similarities, but yet also I learned so much. That means there's a lot of differences as well, right? But really for me, it's the work that I do in Chinatown, it comes down to kind of connecting the dots for me. Yeah, I have a lot of memories from being a child, a lot of memories about accessing Chinatown, like here as well as like growing up in Calgary, like what that Chinatown has meant to me. It did feel kind of like a distant community in some ways that we'd visit on the weekends, right? And we'd spend time in, but it never really felt quite like my identity in any way. I think it's quite a process, like all of this relationship building within Chinatown, relationship building within myself, with myself and with other people. And it's just it's a really wonderful space to kind of create that moment to talk with other people, find our connections, and what better way to like than do it with art.
For sure, because you were talking earlier about your art with the mural. Is there any aspect of it that's more playful and like kind of honoring your childhood and your upbringing and like memories of growing up tangentially in Chinatown?
So with that one, because it's more of a consulting project with students.
Yeah.
I kind of approached it more like a commercial illustration job.
Okay.
I wanted to capture everything that folks and all the students were saying,
Right.
rather than put myself in that one in particular.
Okay.
But again, that's like all about relationship building, right? Like that opportunity, for me, it was more important to make those connections with the Multicultural Center.
Right. I mean, you've also done your own series about Chinatown. You've kind of honored them through your other illustrations. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. I think over the last few years working in Chinatown, I've realized that I don't quite have the language, but I'm much more comfortable expressing myself through visual art.
Okay.
So drawing Chinatown is like, it's place keeping to some folks, but also place making for myself, because I'm developing these connections to the spaces that I'm learning about, and like developing relationships and connections too. I think this is the first picture that I did. So this was the one on double greeting. Of course, it's edited and made into a print. It's on two pages.
Yeah.
But yeah, just sitting down and taking a moment to capture the restaurant, but also with like these barriers. I mean, it's still there, right? But at the time, there was like one person's waiting for takeout and had like a mask on.
Right.
It was just really hard to access. The LRT kind of blocked this whole section off. So I think there was like one entry at that point.
Right.
And I just remember feeling a lot of grief around Chinatown, as well as like kind of like my own identity at that time, and wanting to make that connection. So I started drawing. Yeah, just lots of storytelling and learning throughout this whole process. And I'm still doing that. So
I really love it. And I think you have quite a few more that you've posted recently, which I'd love for people to see. Is there a vision of Chinatown that you have for your son, for future generations, that you want to be part of?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in Chinatown, often, like, you know, with the media and the things that like the general public know about it. It's very skewed, or it's very fear-based often, and I think there's a lot going on that we just love to celebrate, right? So I'm trying to bring my child in as much as I can when there's like any kind of festival. Yeah, and I know it is hard, but I think that there's a lot of these stories that still need to be shared, and I think Chinatown is like it's a great place to start.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, like all that stuff is beyond just a neighborhood as well.
Scott and Svitlana were running Pei Pei Chei Ow when we interviewed them, but they've since grown into a new space that is still in the heart of Edmonton called Bernadette's. I'm grateful that Scott and Svitlana were able to share their perspective of the area, and that they continue their efforts of community building in Edmonton. We talked about the importance of food security, building and engaging with community, representation, knowledge sharing, and storytelling, and so much more. And I wanted to share some of that with you.
We just launched Pei Pei Chei Ow. So Pei Pei Chei Ow means robin in Omishkagwin. Actually, Pei Pei Chei Ow is a really important name for me, just because the history behind it. It was a name given to me by my grandfather when I was a small kid. And yeah, we're a catering company, also like education company. We do a lot of food demos, demonstrations in public schools, just really teaching settlers about what Indigenous food is from my perspective, but also the multiple perspectives of Indigenous cuisine and how regional it is and how different it is all across Canada.
And then, you know, when you talk about the bird being a messenger of spring, like it's a messenger of change, and I think this is something a lot that we do, you know, from like the culinary to, you know, events, business, to like cultural, educational pieces as well, because it is something really, really new, and it is really, really empowering for a lot of people, and it is a really big change, the way I see it.
That's really cool. Is that part of the classes you extend to people as well? Like, do you talk about that aspect of it?
Yeah, we talk about like Indigenous food in general is very political. A lot of people, we talk about the history of Canada, like food reservations, and with the reservation system was the food rations. So we always try to incorporate some sort of dish that includes food rations, like canned spam, but really elevated. We did a breaded spam dish with harvested wild ginger, horseradish, and then we paired that with some parsley and lemon zest, people were blown away. And I think it's just, I always tell them it's my way of showing, like, turning food insecurity to food security.
Do any of those factors influence your decision to set up on 97th Street in like the downtown area or anything like that?
So what brought us to this area was just really collaboration with James and Lana, who own the gallery. And during that time we were looking for a kitchen. We were ready to build a kitchen, but plans fell through. And they're like, build a kitchen here.
So Lana Whiskajak and James Lamouche, they decided to take over the gallery and kind of like grow the retail space and like the artistic space. And as Scott is saying, we always talked about like wanting like a really nice like soup and sandwich type of like casual takeout, but like something that is very, very good, and has a story. And like, yeah, like Scott was mentioning, we ended up moving in together and expanding, kind of growing together from this one place. And it's really amazing, and I would never like want to live in any other neighborhood in the city than here because of how historic it is and how diverse it is. And there is definitely a sense of community because like there's so many different groups of people who like historically resided and developed here, and like now, I don't know, I feel like everyone tries to help each other, and it's amazing. Also, like, the community connections have been really powerful. Just even every person who walks through the door or like orders something from us, you know, we are able to build a connection.
Would you mind sharing a little bit more in terms of Indigenous flavors, what those are?
Oh yeah, so for me, Indigenous flavors is like berries, it's wild meat, it's that incorporation of smoke into like a stew. I say incorporation of smoke into a stew because when we smoke geese, it absorbs all that flavor, and then we put it into broth, and then braise it. And then like that smoke just perfumes the stock, and it's just a whole different flavor, but also experience. And when I taste those flavors, it brings me back to when I was like 8. Food's very powerful. Food has a lot of medicinal properties, especially like culturally appropriate food, I think is the most important.
Is anything not what you expected, or is this what, when you moved from Toronto?
When we moved here from Toronto, there wasn't a lot. So that was like a culture shock. But now like our group of people are like, extremely diverse.
Edmonton grew and developed, and we were able to find like the community that we like, and like even just in different areas, it's developing. So.
The history behind any Chinatown is deeply rooted in the Chinese diaspora. But as I think back to Jess's version of Chinatown and the many versions of Chinatown we've been able to learn from others, I realize that the strength and the richness here extends beyond what we perceive. I'm grateful to know that no matter the version of Chinatown, the commonality we share is a passion to preserve a place that continues to allow people to come together, to share in food and drink, and to build friendships and lasting community.